Great. I see we're recording. Terrific. Then I'll check in with you closer to 8:30.
8:30. Okay.
Thank you. This is just a setup for mommy, mother, mom. We're going to begin at 8:30. Check back at 8:30 for this free presentation on Facebook Live and on Zoom. therhino.org, THERHINO.org, or right here on Facebook Live at 8:30. Yay. Hey Joe,
Hey there.
how's it going?
Okay, how are you?
Okay, good, good, thanks. Let me just check. Test, test.
Sounds good.
Yep. Test, test.
Sounds good.
Test, test.
Sounds good.
Great. Let's just do this. Okay, good. Okay, great.
I hear a tap.
Thank you. Okay, good. And let's see. Okay, good.
I hear the tap.
Great, thank you. Okay, great. So thank you for joining us, everybody. We'll begin shortly with Mommy, Mother, Mom. Yay! Thanks for being here. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. I got a girl in Kalamazoo. My mommy was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 1928. How great is that? She has a Glenn Miller song written about her. I grew up hearing that song. Hey, hey, mommy, that's you. You're from Kalamazoo. I love it. Yay! My mommy. She died in 2019. And I have a memory of her. A sudden memory jolt now with COVID. It has to do with hair. You see, I always had short hair. When I was a kid, I had the shortest hair because my parents wanted me to be a little conservative boy, with a short haircut. Real tiny Republican, right? And I always resisted them because it was like the 70s. And I wanted to have long hair like everybody, like John Travolta, right? Right? But they didn't want it. No, they wanted me to have short hair. And every once in a while it'd get kind of long, they hadn't noticed. And all of a sudden, they cut it off. And as I got older, that became my hairdo. So when I stopped living with them, I just had it cut that way. I kept having my hair cut short. Yeah. And, like I'm an actor, so if I put like a drunk or somebody really mean or a biker, I'd grow it out a little bit. But the second the show was over, I'd cut it off. But with COVID-19, you weren't supposed to get haircuts, right? Because it was dangerous being around like people for half an hour. I mean, just nothing against hair cutters. I don't think they all have COVID or anything, but you weren't supposed to get haircuts, right? And then I just let it keep growing. And I thought, you know what? I still don't feel safe around hair cutters, so I don't feel safe around anyone. So here's the thing. I'm not going to get it cut until, yes, I'm fully vaccinated and cooked. So it just keeps growing and growing. Now my mommy, her hair was always the same. She had this cute perm. It was these lovely curls and the color kept changing. Sometimes it was brown, then it was blonde, then it was blonde gray, then blonde white, then blonde again. But she always had this lovely perm. And then when she went into memory care, she stopped caring about her hair. She stopped thinking about it. And I saw her hair as it naturally was for the first time. It grew out long and down her back. And that's exactly how my hair looks now. This is how her hair looked. Yes, just hanging down her back. Look at that. That was my mommy's hair. Yeah. So, I have a memory of my mommy on my head, thanks to COVID-19. My husband Michael and I, we went up and saw her the night before she died. That makes it sound like there was a whole bunch of time after she died, like a whole day, but there wasn't. I mean, we went up at 10 p.m. and we were there till about 11. And then she died at 3. And my younger brother and I were sitting next to the bed, side by side, and we were just chatting. I think that we were just trying to not think about things, just sort of, talk and lighten the mood. And we were even laughing about some stuff. And then I looked over at Michael. His face was ashen. It was drooped. He had a look of shock on his face. And then I looked at what he was looking at. It was my mommy. In her little bed, under a blanket. And she had her hands like this. And she pressed her head up against the wall next to her bed. And her hair was hanging down to her neck. And this is what she was doing. She was just trying to breathe. When I was preparing this piece, I kind of thought maybe that was the death rattle, but it's not. It's different. It was just her trying to get oxygen. She was just an organism that could not get enough oxygen, and she was fighting for it. She'd lost all awareness of everything else. She just lay there in her little bed, with her head pressed up against the wall. That was not the beginning of the dissolution of my family. That began in 2005 when my daddy died. And nobody told us about it. Nobody said anything about it. It was amazing. That was when people stopped talking in my family. To one another, to specific people, the stop talking started. And I know that there are people watching this and they're like, oh yeah, I have that in my family, or I do that with one of my family members. I know that, but I think that is an American tragedy. That at some point, it becomes okay to just stop talking to other members of your family. Something I'm guilty of. It started in 2005. My husband, Michael, and I, we were completely dislocated from my father's death. Nobody told us that he was sick. Nobody told us that he was dying. It was just complete silence. We only found out about it when he actually died. And we went to the funeral and we went to the memorial and we were involved from then on. But before that, nothing. We'd known nothing. And I was in shock at his death because it came as a complete surprise to me. I was completely unprepared for it, unlike everybody else in the family. And also, I was in shock that nobody had told us. And also I was in shock that now my family had entered a phase of not speaking, not talking about certain things. And this sent me reeling. And I really needed to, I don't know, after the funeral, the memorial service, I needed to shake myself up some. I didn't know what I was going to do. I took a job teaching at a graduate playwriting program, the Yale School of Drama. And I went back east for a while. And it was amazing because suddenly there I was back in school and I went and saw all of the students' work, all the grad students' work, the graduate playwriting work, the graduate directing work, the actors' work. And it was incredible because it was all questing. It was questing, it was reaching for something, all of it trying to find something, a new voice, a new aesthetic, a new story to tell. It was incredible. Music, dance, all kinds of things. And the fact that it didn't always work wasn't important. There was always this energy of questing, but there was one work that was supremely confident. It was almost alarming in its confidence. I was breathtaking. It was 3.5 hours long. And I just sat there mesmerized, completely engrossed in the story of a young woman going across war-torn Europe. It was called 0 Hour. It was about the Yugoslavian wars from the 1990s. And I sat there thinking, oh my God, that's my family. My family is Yugoslavia. All right, I know. That's an obscure premise for this tale, but helpful. A helpful premise. You see, Serbia was what was the start of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia came from Serbia, and Serbia at the beginning of the 20th century was seeking recognition. It wanted somebody to acknowledge its existence. It had thrown off the yoke of the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, which had been on it for centuries. And now the Austro-Hungarians, the Habsburgs, were beginning to oppress it, and all Serbia wanted was recognition of its independence, of its greatness. And that is exactly my mommy's story. That was her story. She was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 1928, and she was growing up in the 30s. And all she wanted was recognition. She was a child of the Depression, but she wanted to make it anyway. And she was inspired by something her mother had shown her. She told me this. Her mother took her to Chicago one day and took her to the Palmer House Hotel. My mommy had never seen anything like it. She loved it, but they didn't stay there. They just went into the lobby because they were working class. And my mommy knew. She knew at that moment what she wanted to do. She wanted one day to be able to stay at the Palmer House Hotel and all the great hotels all over the world. Meanwhile, her family, they weren't doing well. It was the Depression, right? They were the Joes. They had to take to the road. So they got into their jalopy. They loaded it up with the family. Everybody piled in, and they were off on the roads of America, down across the Great Plains. The grapes of wrath. Where were they headed? They were following the sun. Why? Because they're headed to Arizona. Why? Because my grandfather and my uncle, they were both trainers. They were both race horse trainers. How exciting. But my mommy, this whole time she wanted something better. She wanted to rise to the top. She wanted to get to the Palmer Hotel. She always reminds me of that song from that great lost musical, the one that I love so much, Little Me, with music by Cy Coleman and lyrics by the incredible Carolyn Lee. The other side of the tracks. That's my mommy. On the other side of the tracks. That is where I'm going to be. On the other side of that great divide between fame and fortune and me. Gonna put my shadow behind me. Give my inhibitions the axe. 'Cause tomorrow morning you'll find me on the other side. The other side. The other side. The other side. On the other side of the tracks. My mommy. They left Arizona and they came to San Jose, where there were racetracks, and they worked in San Jose, and then it was time to leave, but the car had broken down. So they got on the train, and they all loaded onto the train, but my mommy decided to hop off the train. She wasn't going back east with them. She was going to stay. She was going to stay in the Bay Area because she knew that here she might be able to make it. And she had an opportunity because she knew somebody here to go to Los Altos High School. So my mommy was going to stay. She was going to make it. She was going to make it here. She was going to make it here in the Bay Area on the other side of the tracks. On the other side of the tracks. Now, Serbia didn't do so well in World War I, 1914 to 1918. It was getting its start, and that's actually where the war started, when a member of Bosnia, which was allied with Serbia, yes, executed Franz Josef, the Archduke. And that brought Austria-Hungary into war against Serbia. And then all the other nations, because of alliances, came in and joined. And Serbia got trounced. First by the Austrians, then by the Germans. The Serbian army had to flee Serbia. But Serbia ended up on the winning side. Yeah. And the winning side, people like us, right? The British, the French, the Americans. At the Treaty of Versailles, they created a new nation. It would be called Yugoslavia, the nation of the South Slavs. It was composed of pieces of Italy, Hungary, Austria, yes, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, all pieces, all these other countries. And it was an amazing patchwork of small states: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, and North Macedonia. These would make up the new Serbian nation. It was off and running. This brand new nation was launched. And it was a family of states coming together to form a big family of a nation. Yugoslavia, the land of the South Slavs. Now my mommy graduated from high school, and she was off too. She went to college at San Jose State University, and she got her degree in merchandising and marketing. And then she got a job at the Emporium. The big time on Market Street. Now my father used to always joke. He used to say, "You know what department your mother worked in at the Emporium? She worked in intimate apparel." I used to love to tell people that. "Yeah, my wife works in intimate apparel. You can go see her. You can go see her working in intimate apparel." He thought that was so funny. I didn't think that was funny. It was weird. But he admired her because she was a hat buyer. She was the buyer for ladies' hats. And every year she got to go to New York City. And that's where she fell in love with musical theater. She saw the original production of My Fair Lady with Rex Harrison, The King and I with Yul Brynner, and she passed that love of musical theater on to me. He really did admire her, though. One day when we were little kids, he said, "Here, come into my den. Come in here, guys. Come in here." And he took out a big album from the lower shelf of his books. And he said, "Now, don't tell your mother I showed this to you. She'll be angry as hell. Look at this." And he showed us this picture. There's my mommy. Look at that. In college, he said she was voted the most beautiful woman on campus. Don't you love that picture? Isn't it amazing? It's so period. And she looks beautiful there, right? Yeah. Except, you know what? She looks kind of sinister too. Like she's dangerous. Like it's like from a Hitchcock movie. Like she's Rebecca. I love that picture. You know, the two of them, they were just enjoying their lives. She was a buyer of ladies' hats, going off to New York City, taking trips to Europe. She was loving her life. And he was a young attorney, doing incredibly well. And guess what? At some point, they just forgot to get married. They hadn't got married. They were 30 years old, and they didn't know who to marry. So they went to a dating service, like a matchmaker, right? His name was Tommy, Tommy's. He was famous in San Francisco, and he held parties. You paid to go to the parties, and you met people. That's so modern. It's like Match.com. I'm so proud of my parents. And they met each other at one of these parties. Here they are much later. How about those two, huh? Look at, there's that hair. There's that hair of hers, right? Not like this, but the perm. I often think of them, and I think of them to a song with lyrics also by Carolyn Lee. Fairy tales can come true. It can happen to you if you're young at heart. For as rich as you are, it's much better by far to be young at heart. They came together as a couple, and they were transforming their lives. Yugoslavia was transforming itself too. After World War II, it got a monarchy. And the monarchy was going to bring this patchwork of nations together, right? The Slovenes, the Croats, the Bosnians, the Serbs, the Montenegrins, the Kosovans, right? The Macedonians, all of them were going to be brought together into this patchwork of nations to form Yugoslavia. The monarchs were really strong. They were strong monarchs, but they also had a parliament. But unfortunately, the 20s and 30s also saw the rise of fascism in Europe. As Hitler rose in the 30s, he started grabbing parts of Europe, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Poland, and the other parts of Eastern Europe he made his allies, and they were all too afraid to say no to him. Bulgaria became Hitler's ally. Hungary became Hitler's ally. Romania became Hitler's ally. But Yugoslavia said no. They would not knuckle under, and Hitler was pissed. So in 1941, he invaded, and in just a few days, he conquered Yugoslavia. All of its constituent states. But the Yugoslavians did not lay down. They formed partisan units. That's where the name pretty much comes from, partisans. When people thought of partisans when I was growing up, they thought of Yugoslavians. Because in World War II, they fought back. They didn't surrender. They didn't give up. They fought back. There were two large partisan groups. First of all, the Serbian partisans who, fought for Serbian independence. But there was another partisan group, the communist partisans, and they fought for everybody because the communists didn't believe in just Serbs or Croats or Bosnians or Montenegrins. They believed in everybody, so they fought for the entire nation, for Yugoslavia, the commie partisans. And the head of them was Marshal Tito. Oh, Marshal Tito, who could bring everybody together because he was a good socialist. He was a Croat himself, but he didn't fight for the Croats. He fought for all Yugoslavians, and they held back the German army at two massive battles, amazing battles. First of all, the Battle of Neretva, and then the Battle of Sujecka. Oh, they fought back and held off the Nazis. And it is amazing because in the 60s and 70s, they were revered, right? Yugoslavia could make movies about this stuff because everybody wanted to see them, because all good socialists across the world wanted to see these partisan movies because the Yugoslavians were the ultimate partisans. In 1969, they made the Battle of Neretva with Yul Brynner. Oh, my favorite. I love him. And in 1973, they made the Battle of Sujecka with Richard Burton. Oh, those are my two favorite movie stars. I love them. I love them. I love them. They're great. Why? Well, they're great movie stars, but also they love to sing and dance, right? The King and I and Camelot. They're great. They're like musical comedy people. And I love the posters for these things. The greatest artist of the 20th century actually donated his art, his poster, for the Battle of Neretva because he was a good socialist. Pablo Picasso. He made this poster. Look at that. Isn't that great? It's just like his Guernica painting, his most famous painting. But this is a poster for a Yugoslavian movie. Here, it's easier to see in the black and white. Look at that. There it is. All those Guernica elements. It's great. And here's the poster for the Battle of Sujecka with Richard Burton playing Marshal Tito himself. Oh my God, there are pictures of them actually talking about how to play Marshal Tito. Marshal Tito was giving Richard Burton acting lessons. Isn't that incredible? I love it. There was a third movie about the Yugoslav partisans, right? A Hollywood movie, actually, made in LA. It was called Force 10 from Navarone, and it stars Harrison Ford. But, Harrison Ford, he never sang or danced, so he just never did it for me, you know what I mean? It's just, I can't get excited about him. He was like, that was like, Yul Brynner and Richard Brayton, I just never, The Yugoslavian partisans, they fought to the end of the war, and Yugoslavia is the only country in Europe that liberated itself. Not France, not Poland, none of them. But Yugoslavia, with its partisans, liberated itself. It was amazing. My parents got married in this church, Christ Episcopal Church in Alameda in 1957. Isn't that great? It was on Grand Avenue. It burned in 1960. They moved to Pacific Heights, and they had their first child, a little boy. They named it after my daddy, Peter Willard Fisher Jr. But he died in infancy. My daddy once told me that he was born early, and so his little lungs weren't strong, and they just sort of shredded when he breathed. And he died. My aunt told me recently when I was preparing this piece, she said, he was the most beautiful baby I've ever seen. I said, what about me? And she said, no, he was beautiful. My older brother, who I never met. So they moved to Sausalito and they tried again. They had another boy who became my older brother, Peter Harrison Fisher. And then they had me, and then they had my little brother. The three of us. Yeah. And my mommy used to drive us around in a car. And she was my mommy because she put us in the back seat. We'd get into our seatbelts. And she always turned around and looked at my little brother and me. And she said, you two are so cute. I always said, don't call me cute. Don't call me cute. But I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I thought she was wonderful. And she loved her babies. She did. So the war in Europe ended. Yugoslavia had freed itself, and now Marshal Tito was in charge. And he set up a communist country, and he was going to bring all of these peoples together. And there was such diversity in Yugoslavia, like in no other nation. There were people who identified as Europeans, people who identified as Slavs, people who identified as Albanians, people who identified as Greeks and Turks. And the ethnicities were incredible. If you look at a map of Yugoslavia, it's amazing, the mix. There were Jews, there were Muslims, there were Catholics, there were Eastern Orthodox, a whole mix of things. Up here is Slovenia. Now Slovenia, that's where Melania comes from. Slovenia is almost completely Catholic, but just south of it is Croatia. Croatia is primarily Catholic, but has a large Eastern Orthodox population also, Serbian. Here's Bosnia, Herzegovina. The Bosnians are mostly Muslim, but they have a large minority of Eastern Orthodox and of Catholics, Croats and Serbs. Here is Serbia, mostly, yes, Eastern Orthodox, but they have a lot of other things in there too, Here's Montenegro, mostly Eastern Orthodox. Kosovo, which is Muslim, but also a lot of Eastern Orthodox. And all the way down here, Northern Macedonia, which is mostly Eastern Orthodox, but has a large Muslim population. And Tito was going to bring this all together. He was the great unifier. He created a family like my parents were creating because he didn't believe in difference. He just believed in Yugoslavia. And also, he didn't entertain dissent. Nobody could dissent. There was no dissent in Yugoslavia. They had a gulag like the Russians on an island, in the Adriatic. People were sent there if they were dissenters. They died of hunger, of disease. They withered away. But what he did right was he opened up a communist country. He didn't align himself with the Russians. He opened up to the West. You could go there as a tourist. He let his people leave his country and make money and come back and bring the money back to it. He was amazing. And he would not align himself with anybody. As a matter of fact, in the UN, he set up the non-aligned countries. He headed that. Countries like Egypt, Indonesia, India became non-aligned like him. And Stalin hated this. He hated this. He hated that he was sort of liberal and open-minded. He didn't have an iron curtain. He didn't keep his people. And Stalin was pissed because Stalin wanted, all the communist countries to be under Stalin, Poland and East Germany and Yugoslavia. He wanted, so he kept sending assassins assassins to kill Tito. And finally, Tito sent him a letter and he said, stop sending assassins to kill me. We keep finding them. We keep discovering them. And listen, you send one more assassin to kill me, I'm going to send one to Moscow. And you're not going to find that guy. That guy, he's going to come back here. Job done. Mission accomplished. This is how he held the country together. A country of great, great diversity, of great difference. There was a lot of difference in my family. 3 boys, very different. My older brother was a scientist. I was an actor. Younger brother was a businessman. But there were also other differences, emotional differences, gay and straight, political differences, conservative and liberal. And as we got older, tensions began to show. Cracks between us. Little things at first, but they became more pronounced. This was also true in Yugoslavia, because in 1980, Tito died. And without the father figure, without that person keeping them all together, holding it all together, believing in communism, believing in the entity as a whole, they began teetering. The cracks began to show. The tensions, ethnic tensions, religious tensions. And there'd been a lot of intermarriage. There'd been a lot of moving beyond religion and ethnicity. That was true. But when economic challenges kicked in, then they began to see that maybe Yugoslavia wasn't going to survive. It began teetering. In 1989, it was teetering. And the constituent portions, the constituent states stopped talking to each other. And that's what happened in my family. When my father died, people stopped talking to each other. I was told nothing. Why? Why all these tensions? Why tensions between us? Well, my parents did a great job. I mean, they really did. They gave us all values, right? They gave us a sense of ourselves. They taught us how to value ourselves and to value our relationships with other people and to see that other people had value as we did. They also gave us a sense of independence. They made us feel that they weren't always going to be there. We had to figure it out. That nobody was always going to help us. That we would have to go out into the world and make the world work for us. Values and independence, they fed each other. Our independence would allow us to value the world. Our values would allow us a sense of independence. But they also gave us a third thing. That was judgments. And they were petty criticisms, but all the time. And they never even seemed to be all that important to them. They just vocalized them all the time. Dumb things. Things about our appearance, our personal choices, and worst of all, how we made them look. And I think they weren't even really judgments. They were just prejudices. Perhaps it was their class. Perhaps it was that they were both so ambitious, trying to claw themselves up into the upper class. I don't know, but they absorbed a lot of prejudices. It became very difficult for us. We resisted, first them and then each other. The economic tensions continued in Yugoslavia. In 1990, a man named Milosevic became the head of Yugoslavia. But he was a Serb, and really all he cared about was Serbia and the Serbian majority in the Yugoslav states. He was tough. He had a vision of Serbians as dominant. The other states began to resist, like we had resisted my parents. They began to push back and they began to break off. Slovenia in 1991 wanted to break off. It was predominantly Catholic. And Milosevic, after a 10-day war, decided, well, there aren't that many Serbians in Slovenia, so he let him go. Then Croatia wanted to break off under the leadership of a man named Teuman. They were also Catholic, but there was a large Serbian minority in Croatia. And Milosevic wanted to protect them, so he fought back. He fought back against them. And things are beginning to fall apart. And the integrity of Yugoslavia is like this bookshelf. This bookshelf from here to here. It was like that. And when the states started leaving, the bookshelf started to lose its integrity. more dissent, more breaking off, and more integrity was lost. Soon paramilitary groups were formed. They weren't even armies. They were just defined by ethnicity. Serbian militias, Croatian militias within Bosnia fighting back. It became turmoil, complete and total turmoil. And I realized that my father had been our Tito. He'd been the one who kept us together, that made us solid. Somehow or other, without us even knowing it, he had done that. And when he died, people stopped talking to each other. And our family, also, like this bookshelf, stopped talking. And words are what hold this bookshelf up. And when the words stopped, when we as a family stopped talking to each other, the bookshelf started to lose its integrity. It started to collapse. It started to fall. It started to collapse into itself. Our words have betrayed us. Not the saying of them, but the not saying of them. In 1992, Bosnia wanted to break off. Bosnia-Herzegovina, that state. And Milosevic was incensed. He had let Slovenia go. He had almost at this point let Croatia go, but he was not going to let Bosnia go because there were so many Serbs in Bosnia. And Bosnia was a Muslim majority, and his Serbs were a minority, but they had to fight back. Also, the Croats had people there too, Catholics. So the Catholics and the Serbs were now fighting the Muslims, the Bosniaks, and the beautiful city of Sarajevo fell the way of the beautiful city of Dubrovnik earlier. It was destroyed. It was attacked. There were these paramilitary groups fighting with each other. The city was savaged, and the news emphasized the beautiful architecture being destroyed. But in fact, it was the people. It was the loss of people. It was the dying of people. After my father died, my older brother and my mother went at it. They'd always been critical of each other. My brother's whole life, I don't know why, but she was always critical of him. He's not a bad guy, but she was always on his case, and he lashed back. And without my father there, it all fell apart. They completely stopped talking to each other. And then my little brother was great. He became my mother's companion because he saw that she was lonely. She'd had a husband her whole life, the only man in her life since she got married, and now he was gone. And my little brother took care of her. But that meant that he was associated with my mother, which meant that my older brother stopped talking to me. But that came later. First, he stopped talking to my little brother because of her association with Mom. And I was shocked because suddenly he was friendly with me, my older brother. And I was blessed, I was flattered, but I also felt like I was a co-conspirator. Like somehow I was involved. I was helping him. I was an ally. In Bosnia, there was ethnic cleansing. The Serbs kept sending troops to support their minority, and soon their minority was becoming the majority because they had all the weapons. They began deporting people, moving them out, shuttling them around. Ethnic cleansing in the 1990s. Something I'd read about in books, but suddenly it was happening, even in my lifetime. It was incredible. In 1995, NATO stepped in to police, to help, to prevent anything else happening, things getting worse, but they arrived too late. Because already in Bosnia, there was a Serbian concentration camp where they were putting Bosniaks, Muslims, Potokari. The war crimes trial after the war, evidence was given against the Serbs. Here's evidence given by a man named Zumra Seha Homorovic. The Serbs began at a certain point to take girls and young women out of the group of refugees. These girls and young women were raped. The rapes often took place under the eyes of others, and sometimes even under the eyes of children of the mother. A Dutch soldier, a member of NATO, there to keep peace, stood by and he simply looked around with a Walkman on his head. He did not react at all to what was happening. It did not happen just before my eyes, for I saw that personally, but also before the eyes of all. The Dutch soldiers walked around everywhere. It is impossible that they did not see it. There was a woman with a small baby, a few months old. A Serb guard told the woman that the child must stop crying. When the child did not stop crying, he snatched the child away and he cut its throat. Then he laughed. There was a Dutch soldier there who was watching. He did not react at all. I saw yet more frightful things. For example, there was a girl. She must have been about 9 years old. At a certain moment, some Serbian guards came up to her and recommended to her brother that he rape the girl, his sister. He did not do it. And I also think that he could not have done it, for he was still just a child. Then the Serbian guards murdered that young boy. I have personally seen all that. I really want to emphasize that all this happened in the immediate vicinity of the base of that camp. In the same way, I also saw other people who were murdered. Some of them had their throats cut. Others were beheaded. The atrocities got worse. At a place called Srebrenica, genocide, planned and organized genocide. At Srebrenica, the Serbians took people out of the town. They dug trenches, they put them in the trenches, and they shot them in the back of the head. 8,300 of them. Not since Adolf Hitler, the Holocaust, had anything like this been seen. And here what's happening in the middle of Europe in 1995. It was shocking. Okay, yeah, all right, you know what? The dissolution of my family is not anything like this. Okay? I get it. I know that. Columns of people formed because they wanted to escape. They knew what was happening. They headed out into the woods, these columns. They were desperate. They were cold. They were undernourished. It was freezing out there. And all of a sudden, the Serbians were chasing them. And they started to run. They were running from the Serbians. And the Serbians were pursuing them. They were hunting them. Hunted. Finally, there was a peace accord. The involved parties met in Dayton, Ohio, in December of 1995. They came together. And a ceasefire was proclaimed. But that wasn't the end of it. It wasn't. In 1998, Kosovo wanted to break off. It had a Muslim majority. Kosovo identified with Albania. It didn't identify with Yugoslavia, not with Serbia. And it had a Muslim majority. It wanted to break off, go to Albania. But there were a lot of Bosnians. There were a lot of Serbians there. So Serbia attacked. And then North Macedonia. It had a Muslim minority. It started to suppress them, attack them, kill them. And finally, NATO got involved again. United States aircraft carriers launching Tomahawk missiles. Even in 2001. And in preparing for this piece, I've read about things, I've listened to podcasts. It is still going on. It's considered like a hot spot, like it might heat up again. Mother and brother and I remained friends. We actually were two people talking. I was the only person they talked to in the family. I was flattered, as I said, but it was weird. It was erratic. The communication wasn't reliable. Sometimes I wouldn't hear from them for years. I'd send them presents. I didn't even know if they got them. I'd send them texts, wishing them happy birthday. Nothing. Emails, phone calls, nothing. Then all of a sudden they pop up out of the blue and then disappear for another few years. It was so strange. And finally I just decided it was sad. It was too sad for me. So I broke it off. I stopped communicating with my older brother. I actually joined the family of people who don't talk. It's funny. I talked to my aunt this week about all this, and she said, your older brother, he calls me. He does. He asks for pictures of your mother. He asks what's going on in the family. It's like, what? That is where we are now. I don't talk to my older brother. He doesn't talk to my little brother. My little brother doesn't talk to him. So he talks to my aunt to find out things he could. Well, in that regard, politically, my family does feel like Yugoslavia. Yeah. Michael and I were there when my mommy died. I mean, it was very sad, but I was happy to be involved. I felt engaged. My little brother was there. My aunt was there. It was good. It brought closure. And then I thought of something. As I was thinking about this piece. One day when I was little, it was when I still called my mommy, mommy, before I called her mother, mother, which was my response to her prejudices. I was like, mother, mother. And she convinced me finally to call her mom. Don't call me mother. You don't have to call me mommy, but don't call me mother. Call me mom. Okay, so that was our truce. But this is back when I still called her mommy, and I heard her on the phone. And I came downstairs, and I looked at her, and she did something she never did while she was on the phone. She suddenly sat down in a chair, as if the rug had been yanked out from under her. And she put the phone down, and she dabbed her eye. I said, "Are you okay, mommy?" And she said, "My father died." And then she pulled herself up together. She put her little tissue into her sweater, and she went upstairs. And that's the first time I'd ever heard anything about her father. I'd never met her mother or father. I didn't even know until recently that her mother died long before I was born. But the father, she never talked about him. We never met him. He never came. We never saw him. There was something between her and her parents. I don't know what it was. We never discussed it. Nobody seems to know. She always kept it to herself. That night, I could hear them downstairs talking. My father and my mother. My father was being very sympathetic. And he said, do you want to fly home for the funeral? And she said no. She was upset. She was emotional, but she said no. I never met my grandparents on that side. I couldn't have met my grandmother, but I could have met my grandpa. But for some reason, she wasn't talking to them. My father, on the other hand, complete opposite. I mean, he used to fight with his brother and sister and his mother and father endlessly, but they always talked. They always talked, and they were always there for us. To this day, my aunt's in the picture. She's sharp as a tack. She is like doing this and this and this. She is not letting COVID get her down. She is on the attack, and it has been like wonderful. And I know that there have been tensions and weirdnesses, but they've always talked to each other. Always. All of them. This great, wonderful mix of a family. And how many people do we get to know in this world, right? And then we stop talking to them all of a sudden. Crazy. Yugoslavia went on. There were war crimes trials. They didn't get Milosevic. He was found guilty, but he died in 2006 before he could be sentenced. He was no longer head of Serbia, so he got dragged into court for his war crimes. Those 8,300 dead. Genocide. There were others, generals, who were found guilty, thrown in jail for life. There is an amazing documentary I watched preparing for this piece. Incredible. It's called The Destruction of Yugoslavia, made by the BBC. They are all there. Every single one of them. Toyman, the head of Croatia. Milosevic, the head of Serbia. Every single one of them. People who ended up in jail. There's a guy in jail giving an interview, and they're all wearing suits, all talking about what happened and rationalizing their behavior, their genocides, their attacks, their murders, all of them. And they're all wearing suits. They look like senators. It's so interesting to see a bunch of people in suits rationalize war crimes. Makes you wonder about our politicians. You know, it's suits. It's like a uniform. It confers power on you, right? You know, Carolyn Lee was a wonderful lyricist. I always loved her stuff. And her best collaborator was Cy Coleman. He was so great. I love Cy Coleman. One of my favorite composers of musicals ever. And they wrote a musical for Lucille Ball. And I always thought of my mommy. I always saw her as Mary Tyler Moore. That's what I thought she looked like, Mary Tyler Moore. And I thought she kind of acted like that. She had the same kind of smile. She was very beautiful. But the funny thing is that sometimes she acted like Lucy. And Lucy was in this musical called Wildcat. And I think that sums up my mommy. Wildcat. The big song from Wildcat is, hey, look me over, hey, lend an ear. That was my mommy. She was always at the center of things. And when we were very small, she made us feel wonderful. They gave us values. They gave us independence. And they tossed in the judgments. And then something in our genes kicked in. And for a while, my father's genes had us, brought us together, held us together. But we also had my mommy's genes. And something about striving, trying to get out the other side of the tracks, meant you had to leave things behind. Stop talking to people. Which is what destroys families, destroys countries, destroys people. Well, I'm as guilty as any of them. I still don't talk to my older brother. Thank you for joining me this evening. This has been Mommy, Mother, Mom. I'm John Fisher, and it's a pleasure to perform for you. I do sense you out there on the other side of my camera, and I feel your energy. I know that sounds corny, but I do. You've kept us going during COVID-19, and as it continues, we've provided a lot of free entertainment, which has been our pleasure. Many of you have made donations and contributions. Those have helped us out a lot in these difficult COVID-19 times. If you'd like to make a contribution to our theater to support our programming, you can do so by sending a check to me, John Fisher. I have my COVID-19 working address, Theater Rhinoceros, 91 Central Avenue, Suite number 102, San Francisco, California, 94117. Or go on our website, therhino.org, and make a donation through PayPal. That's therhino.org. We have a number of great programs coming up. New reading in Joe Talley's reading series coming up on a Tuesday at 7. Check out the website. Yay, Joe! Joe's always here with me. I feel him too. He's right there. Couldn't do it without Joe. Also, we have Mark Nadler making a unique Theater Rhinoceros visit. He has come up with this great show for us called Gay As They Say, which is all about, those lyrics that are in Cole Porter songs, right? They are really as gay as you think they are, right? So it's great. He's going to sing the songs and tell us all about it. He's an incredible performer from New York, creating a special show for us online for Theater Rhinoceros. And then the final show of our subscription season, Pillow Talk, a wonderful play about West Oakland in the 1990s, which went into rehearsal last night. So please check that out. All of these programs are free. We'd love it if you made a donation to support our theater, but more than anything, we appreciate you turning out for the shows. Thank you so much for being with me tonight. You were great. Good night.